this episode, we meet Kelsi Cox, Supportive Housing Manager at HomeGround, the Auckland City Mission's integrated housing and health facility in central Auckland. Kelsi came to Aotearoa from British Columbia on a Rotary scholarship in 2013 and never left. Her background spans international development, public health, the YWCA, the Ministry for Women, the Department of Corrections, and Women's Refuge. In this episode, Kelsi talks about what happens after someone is housed. She talks about the funding system that sees intertwined needs as separate categories and why her ask is simple. Start with the person. More information on this episode can be found in the episode description. And don't forget to subscribe to the Char Hub podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.
Oh, Kelsi, it's great to be here with you this afternoon, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy day. I know you are a very busy person, and it is a privilege to actually get to spend this time with you because we have worked together in the past a number of times. So I wonder if we could just start off by you telling me a bit about yourself, your background, what brought you to this work, but maybe even before you start that, could you tell us a bit about the space we're actually sitting in here at Te Tapu Atiwhai Auckland City Mission?
Yeah, for sure. So we're sitting in the level 9 garden of HomeGround. So this is a really special space. It's a tenant whānau led space. This garden, I believe, is one of the only rooftop gardens in Auckland City. So it's very amazing. Yeah, it's very special for us. As you can see, we have a coffee tree, hibiscus, but we also have a papaya tree. We have fig trees. We grow grapes. We have a lemon tree in the garden. So it's a really special place, and it's largely all run by whānau who live in the building and volunteers. Yeah, so that's where we are.
Nice. Thank you, Kelsi. And to that point, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so I'm originally from the west coast of Canada. I grew up in British Columbia. I moved to Aotearoa in 2013 on a Rotary ambassadorial scholarship. I came here to study international development, and before that, I was studying public health. So I've got a background in development, community development, public health, and I've spent really the last kind of 13 years working across community, local government at Auckland Council, and central government in Wellington. And then most recently, I've come to Te Tapu Atiwhai to work in supportive housing. Yeah, so my background has been very much in the community social services, always around equity, supporting communities to thrive, addressing systemic inequities. And a lot of what I've done over my career has been working with women, with wāhine. I've worked at YWCA Auckland. I've worked at Manatū Wāhine, the Ministry for Women in Wellington. I worked at the Department of Corrections as a principal advisor for women, and I've worked at a women's refuge. So it's kind of been a theme throughout my career, a real commitment to supporting wāhine and their whānau to thrive, addressing the inequities that women experience. On a personal level, I've got a 4-year-old. So a lot of my time is spent being a mom and balancing the really kind of busy and demanding work that I do here with looking after myself.
Of course.
Yeah.
And your role here, you're supportive housing manager, is that correct?
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about your role? And what actually supportive housing is?
Yeah, so I'm the supportive housing manager. My team provides support for the whānau who live at HomeGround. So we have 80 tenants here, and 40 of them are supportive housing, housing first whānau, and 40 are social housing. So they are on income assistance, but they live independently. And supportive housing is really about providing wraparound support such as medical, living skills, life skills for people who need extra support to sustain their tenancies. And here we have a Housing First model. So Housing First is an evidence-based model that came out of New York many years ago. And in its simplest form, it's really saying that before we do anything else, we need to provide people with housing. Because if you don't have housing, then it's very difficult to address addiction, mental health, the challenges that many people face. So people who live here have experienced chronic homelessness. So many of them have been homeless for many years. They often have mental health and substance use challenges. And so we work with those 40 people in the building to connect them to other services, such as our healthcare center here, dental services, our Māori development services. We have a work program called Street Guardians that people can be involved in. And then like this garden, we support people to connect to community. And this community is for all 80 people who live at HomeGround.
So Kelsi, you spoke about some of the challenges there that you see around providing that long-term, sustainable, supportive housing. What challenges do people face when they're actually transitioning from long-term homelessness into permanent housing, like the housing you provide here at HomeGround?
Yeah, so many of the people who have been housed at HomeGround have been homeless for many, many years. They've spent a long time living in unstable housing. And when you're in that situation, you're often in a fight or flight mode. You know, you're looking after, concerned about where you're going to spend your next night. It's unsafe, all, violence, challenges around you. So when people come into housing, one of the things whānau have said is that then you can kind of settle down, but often that's when some of the real challenge starts, because you have to, for many people, it's facing a lot of the trauma that they've experienced over their lifetime. I think some of the challenges are that, many people, when you're living on the streets, you don't learn how to sustain a tenancy, how to live in an apartment. So we have people who, spent 20 years living outside a countdown, eating out of dumpsters. That was their main source of food. And so when they've moved into HomeGround, they haven't been able to do things like operate a washing machine, a dryer, know how to turn off the taps, how to store food properly, like how to use a fridge, because they haven't had one in many, many years. So one of the things we do is work with whānau in our services to really develop individualized whānau-led plans. And for whānau who might have challenges around, things like turning off the water, we've put in push taps so that they don't leave their water on and flood their apartment. So I think what we see are, really those challenges that come up around how do you sustain a tenancy, things like throwing out your rubbish, how do you be a neighbor alongside many other people? But then there's also those challenges for people around when they slow down, how do they address that trauma that's built up over the things that have happened to them over the years? And that's, I think, where mental health supports, being part of a community where you're connected to people, you feel valued, that's where that becomes incredibly important.
Nice. You started to touch on some of this here, but what are some of the supports and resources that are most critical to help people to sustain their tenancy and keep people housed?
I think, one of the key things for people here that we see is when you've spent a lot of time on the streets, you have very compromised health. So having a really good integrated healthcare system is key. So having the Calder Center here, dental, having that brought on board is critical. Many of the people we work with have dental challenges. I think the supports, one of the things we do here is we work really closely with the tenancy management team. And that enables us to, when someone is having a challenge around their tenancy, whether it be, challenges around hoarding, pests, noise, kind of those challenges, we're able to work really closely with the tenancy managers to say, okay, how can we best support this person? What do they need to be able to maintain their housing? And not just that, but to be able to thrive when they live here. But a lot of the people that we work with, if they had a mainstream tenancy, they would have been evicted a long time ago.
Yeah.
Because you need that ability to adapt and problem solve and work with the person so that you can develop creative ways of supporting them.
Yeah, absolutely. And shows the importance, or what you've just said shows the importance of really that tenancy management and the support side working really closely together to support people to stay housed. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I know we've talked about that before. That's something you and I have talked about. And it's not like we always agree.
Yeah.
You know, tenancy and supportive housing, we don't always see eye to eye. But I think having that relationship where we can challenge each other, and we do ultimately hold the people that we work with at the heart of what we do, and we can collaborate to support people, that's incredibly important, I think. And I've seen that model work really well here. We just had someone who we've been working with for a long time around hoarding challenges, and we worked with the tenancy team to come up with a creative solution. We have the tenant whānau at the center driving their own plan, and I'm hoping we can continue with them leading that work so that they can stay living here. But it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of resources and a lot of time and kind of flexibility on all sides, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Kelsi. You mentioned earlier wāhine, or women's homelessness in particular, and I know you're very passionate about better housing outcomes for women. Can you tell us about some of the unique challenges that you see that are facing women experiencing homelessness?
Yeah. So I think, what we've seen come out of the Coalition to End Women's Homelessness is some of that research, which is telling us that actually, of the people who are homeless in Aotearoa, women make up a large amount of that, over 50%. And I think what we see is that women who are homeless are often couch surfing, sleeping in cars, living in unstable housing, but they may not be as visible. So I think that's one of the challenges. People may not realize that actually women are experiencing homelessness. I think over my time working with women, what I've seen is, the unique challenges that women experience, and some of that is around much higher rates of family violence, domestic violence than men. That's something we see with many of the women who live here that they've experienced, their vulnerability, the trauma that they've experienced through living on the streets, the violence that they've experienced. So I think there's a range of things that kind of through the systemic challenges that are created make women more vulnerable to violence, instability. And so when women move in here, one of the things that I see is sometimes when they slow down, a lot of that trauma kind of catches up with them. And that could be because they've lost their children to to oranga tamariki. Those relationships have broken down, and now they have to face that trauma, and that is really challenging. So we see a lot of mental health and substance use for the women who live here. Yeah.
And I know you're doing some work here specifically for women. Would you like to tell us and share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what we're doing is, alongside the Coalition to End Women's Homelessness, we've started a community of practice. So that's really thinking across Te Tapu Iātawhai, what can we do in our services to have a gender-based Te Tiriti approach? So how can we work to support wāhine, to make sure our services, when we create them, when we roll them out, that they don't just say, everyone in our services is equal. They really think about gender when we're delivering a service. And that could be anything from our frontline services, our healthcare services, to our housing. We have the amazing Te Whare Hena Tore program, which is transitional housing for women from a kaupapa Māori approach. I mean, that's an incredible service that really meets the needs of wāhine, but it's only transitional housing, it's short term. So I think what we're trying to think about at Te Tapu Iātawhai is how can we really meet the needs of wāhine in our services, and kind of trying to do that at different levels, from housing to health, kind of across the spectrum of our services.
Nice. And is there any learnings from overseas, or in particular maybe from Canada, from where you're from, that could help inform what we do here, recognizing that everything needs to be adapted for an Aotearoa context?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I have seen in Vancouver is that they do have more specialized services for women, longer term housing, I think, for wāhine, but not just for wāhine and their children as well, so that they're able to live together in supportive housing. I think if we could have supportive housing models that were able to specifically meet the needs of wāhine, that would be an incredible thing to have here. And you do see that more overseas. I think a service that I visited in Vancouver, they have a women's housing support team. And so that's a team that specializes in working with women, trauma-informed practice, responding to family violence, and they can go into mixed gender long-term housing and support women there. So I think there are definitely models that we can try and adapt that are out there. Yeah.
During your time of working here, what powerful changes have you seen here with the work that you and your team do to enhance people's well-being?
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful spaces I see change in here is in the community space. We put a lot of work into fostering community connection on level 9, so that people who live at HomeGround know that they're valued, they're seen, they're a part of something, and they're connected to people who care about them. It's one of the core values of housing, the Taiki Housing First values in Aotearoa, whakawhanaungatanga and manakitanga. And I think we do a lot of that to foster that connection here. So over my time here, for example, every Thursday we run a community lunch. And you know what I've seen over the time is that now we have more and more whānau coming to be a part of that lunch. But not only that, they'll come out with us every Thursday to buy the groceries, to choose them, and then they'll be involved in cooking the lunch and planning what it is they want to cook, and then everyone will sit down together and eat. We've also, just in the last few weeks, one of the whānau here has started up a gratitude club. So every Monday and Friday, whānau sit down together and talk about what they're grateful for, share some kai and connect. So I think in that community space, I've really seen the importance that people being connected to something, the change that can make in their life. I think I've seen over the time the importance of having relationships with key workers and people who live in the building, that consistent relationship where people know that they're supported, they can access services, someone is here to listen to them. I see the difference that makes in people's lives, just knowing that they can have someone hear them when they have a challenge. I think that really can help people address substance use. It can help them with their mental health because they feel heard, they feel seen, and we're able to help people problem solve on a very practical level, like accessing kai, accessing, MSD when they need help with their benefit.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds like it's a really supportive environment, and like it really creates a sense of belonging for people that are living here. Wonder if you could tell us about how do the tenants here maybe inform what happens here? Is there a process? Is there an engagement process that you run with tenants? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we do have a whānau survey that Tenancy does every year, so we can get feedback kind of in an anonymous way. But we have also, for the time that HomeGround's been opened, there has been HomeGround kind of community where people can come once a week and speak to challenges and what is going well in the building. But we've launched a committee. So that's in partnership with my team and Māori Development Services. And it's an initiative where whānau in the building have signed up. They've chosen to be a part of the committee. And they've had a number of hui. I believe at the one last week, there was 11 of them. And that's where whānau here can say, this is what's working well. These are the challenges. These are things I want to see change. This is what we should focus on. And it's been an amazing space. We have people who you would really not think may be involved in these things, kind of coming and being involved, saying that they want to help, raise funds for HomeGround. They want to raise funds for kai, for us to have barbecues. So that is definitely a space. That committee is whānau owned, whānau led. It's for people in the community.
Nice. That sounds like a really inclusive process.
Yeah.
And in terms of the demographics that live here and the people who live here, is it mainly single people, couples, or gender?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Our housing here, they're all generally studio apartments. We have a few that are 1 bedroom, but those are for accessible units for people who need those 1 bedroom units. So it is really single people. Yeah, that's who are housed at HomeGround. It has been largely more leaning towards men living in the building. However, I've seen that change in the time I've been here. I think we're now around probably 65% wāhine here, 65% men here, 35% wāhine. Yeah.
If I could just zone out a wee bit, because I'm thinking of your background in local government, central government, overseas, NGOs. If you had 1 or 2 policy asks around how we should as a nation be responding to homelessness or ending homelessness, what would that look like? What would they be?
I think one of the things, the system, the government, the way things are funded, that wider system that we cannot control at the level that I work at, because I'm very much at the level where we are supporting people's basic needs. So at that higher systems level, one of the things I would love to see is a much more integrated funding model that places people at the center. Because what I see here is the way the system works is it says this person has a mental health challenge, this person has a substance use challenge, this person has an intellectual disability, but it doesn't acknowledge that most often for the people that we work with, those things are completely intertwined. And you cannot pull apart, from what I see every day, you can't pull apart addiction and mental health. They go together. Why do people use substances? Often because they're depressed. They've experienced trauma. They have traumatic brain injuries. So they use substance to manage that. But the way the system works, I don't think it places those people at the center. It says you either fit this funding model or you fit this one. You're eligible for service or you're not. And most of the time, the people that we work with are not eligible for support. So we have people with very complex mental health, substance use needs, traumatic brain injuries who are just not getting the services that they require to stay housed. We have people coming out of prison who are dropped off by corrections here when they no longer have housing here, and then they are homeless and there's nowhere for them to go. So I think we're at the level that we work at, we're consistently trying and doing the best we can with very limited resources. And I think the people who are housed here, they deserve so much more than what they're getting. So I think I would love to see a model that instead of saying, these are our priorities, they say, here's a person, what do they need? How do we best support them? Because otherwise, that person is going to end up homeless again, or they'll end up in prison, they'll end up, coming in and out of the healthcare system, and then they're costing the system more money. So even at a financial level, I think it makes so much more sense to offer individualized whānau-led support plans.
Absolutely, yeah. And put people at the center of the model.
Of what we do, and give them the resources that they need so that they can thrive and stay well. I think that's, And then if I could think of another thing, what I would love is models, supportive housing models, because there's not enough. We all know that. The model that we have at HomeGround, it's very unique. There are other services across Auckland and Wellington, the big cities that offer supportive housing, but we could use more. But then I think there's also a need for working with specific groups. So supportive housing for wāhine, for rangatahi, supportive housing for young people, for women, so that the services can be designed with their unique needs in mind, which I think you have to do to then support people to stay housed.
Yeah. And how can we better ensure that the person's voice and yours is actually heard at that systems level? Because I acknowledge what you're saying, that you are busy working with the people, but how can we make sure that their needs are heard at that level?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think I mean, I think you do have incredible people like Helen, our chief executive, who is often speaking up. She's saying these things, I think. And one of the amazing things about Helen is that she knows the whānau that we work with. She sees them, she talks with them every day in the laneway. So she's really able to hear their voices and then I think amplify those so that politicians, decision makers can hear them. I think we're always happy to take people on tours of HomeGround, you know, for people to come and meet people. And I think part of that, building those connections, is really demystifying who people are. And I think for politicians, people who make decisions, who have funding that can impact people's lives, I think when you come and you see the lived reality of the challenges that people face, I think you realize, you know, these are people like everyone else who just want to be well, who want to be housed, who want to have access to food, to be a part of a community. And maybe their needs are more complex. But I think, you know, to kind of break down some of those barriers, when we see people as the other and we don't know them, we judge people. So I think the more people can kind of bridge those barriers. And yes, people are always welcome to visit HomeGround and have come to level 9 and have some kai.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's a nice place to be. What are your thoughts on the drivers behind this rise in older people's homelessness?
Yeah, I think like any social challenge, it's intersected issues, but I think definitely it's cost of living. We've seen cost of living rise, especially in Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland. It is so expensive to rent and to live here. I think over the years, when you've seen breakdown in family networks, that people are no longer able to rely on the systems that once kept us housed and supported, I think you see the unique vulnerabilities that place women at risk. Things like women still earn less to every dollar than men, and that's increased if you are wāhine Māori, if you're a Pacific woman. So women are earning less across their lifetimes than men. I think, women who take time out of the workforce to raise children, then they're again put at a disadvantage around their income. I think women who experience family violence, who are then left in relationships that are harmful, and if they leave those relationships, then they are experiencing housing instability or homelessness. So I think you have all those challenges that women face coming together to create this situation where we are seeing a rise in homelessness experienced by women. When we see that 50% of people experiencing homelessness here are women. In Canada, that rate is in the 20s. It's women, kind of around more 27% are women. So what is the difference here? And I think one of the key differences is that we don't have as much housing that is created specifically for the needs of women. So when older women become homeless, when they lose their housing, where are they going to go if they don't have those family support networks to support them, if they don't have an income to rent their own place?
Exactly.
Where will they be housed? And I think that is a challenge we'll continue to see increase unless we develop housing to meet the needs of wāhine, of people who are becoming homeless.
Yeah, so specific housing in the right place, supportive housing specifically for women.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to, one of the things we need to shift as a country is thinking about people who are becoming homeless as someone that we don't know. It's someone who sleeps on the street. That person, we don't know them. We can turn away from them when we walk down the street. I think actually the reality of people experiencing homelessness is that these are people in our community who are losing their housing. And I think we need to stop turning a blind eye towards that and also recognizing that housing is a human right. In Aotearoa, we have the resources for everyone to be housed. And we, for some people, it may require more funding and resources for them to stay housed, but they deserve that. Everybody deserves that support. So I think it's shifting how we think about housing is something, that everybody should be able to afford and they've earned it, to something that actually it's a human right. And some people require more support, but they deserve that housing.
Absolutely.
So what the housing that we provide at HomeGround, supportive housing here, in many ways, it is a bit of the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. We are housing people who have experienced chronic homelessness. But homelessness in Aotearoa is a much bigger challenge that exists across all our communities in this country. You see it from Wellington to Auckland to rural communities. And I think it's a challenge that we all, as New Zealanders, need to think about. How can we play a role in addressing this crisis that we have? Because it is a crisis. We have the resources, we have the capability, we have the ideas to house everyone. I heard someone say somewhere along the way that homelessness is an issue that we created, and it's an issue that we can therefore create a way out of. And I truly believe that. I think models like HomeGround, we are showing that for the people in our society that experience some of the greatest challenges, actually we can house them and support them with resources. And we have people here that we've housed that are housed and doing well, they're thriving. They spent 20, 30 years living on the streets. So they've experienced a lifetime of challenges. I think for many people who are losing their housing because of income instability, because of, relationship breakdown, and they end up homeless, what they really need is accessible and affordable housing that they can live in, and so that they can know that they have a safe place to call home. And from there, they can be well, have their health needs met, be a thriving part of the community. But I think having that accessible, affordable, safe housing is critical for this country as we move forward.
Yeah. Housing is a human right.
Yeah.
And housing is a really key determinant of our health and well-being. If you don't have housing, you can't really move forward, and in a lot of ways.
No, I think that's exactly it. If you don't have housing, you can't address your healthcare needs. And I think that's one of the key things we see here is that people have, very sadly and tragically, a much lower life expectancy, the people that we work with, because of what years of being on the street does to your body. And I think, that's a real tragedy that we see here, because we do lose people much earlier than they should be passing away. And I think that's something that I've seen here over the time that I've worked here.
So Kelsi, how do you and your team work along the tenancy arm here at HomeGround to support tenants?
Yeah, so that's been really one of my favorite parts of this job, is that relationship that we have with our tenancy managers, with the tenancy team. We work, I would say we're almost like siblings that get along sometimes, and other times we fight. And what we do is the tenancy team, they work within tenancy law. They have their drivers, and then we work to support people to sustain their housing. And we work for people to thrive in our service. We really have to work collaboratively, and we have to be willing to problem solve. We have to be willing to adapt and pivot as needed. I think the way we work together is we both understand each other's kind of worldviews and the different drivers that we have, and we work collaboratively. We are transparent. We put whānau, we put tenants at the center of what we do. So everything we do, I think, is around how do we support people to stay housed, but then how do we also look at the wider HomeGround building to ensure, if someone is having a challenge and that challenge is impacting their neighbors, we have to make sure we address it. We can't just let it go. But how can we do that in a way that really supports that tenant and helps them sustain their housing? And our tenancy team here are incredible. We do have HomeGround, but we also have scattered sites across Auckland. That is where people who have independent housing, Auckland City Mission Housing Limited, will be kind of the landlord for that housing, and tenants can live independently in the community with the support of Auckland City Mission Housing Limited. And we've also opened up housing sites across Auckland. We have one off Karangahape Road. We have a new one in Freeman's Bay. So we really want to be able to support people to live across Auckland through a model where they are supported to sustain their tenancy. But it is a very unique model, but from what I see, I think it works really well. And it really puts tenants at the center while ensuring we that they meet the needs of the landlord and that they're supported to really thrive in their tenancy. Regular inspections, all of those kind of things are required, but we work collaboratively as a team.
Nice. And that point around collaboration, actually, because the team at the City Mission has grown quite a bit over the years. So it's not always easy to work in collaboration. It takes real intentionality. And we were talking about that earlier with some other people. Also, what do you work with partners and stakeholders in the community? And how do you share learnings from here? Because it is quite a new model. Is there some way that you do that with other stakeholders across Auckland?
Yeah, definitely across Auckland and even across kind of to Australia. We're a part of Housing First collectives. We're a part of Community Housing Aotearoa, where people come together to share ideas, talk about challenges. There's HUI, where tenancy managers are supported to develop their practice. So absolutely, I think, we work alongside other services like LifeWise, Kahui Te Kaha. I think collaboration is a major part of what we do. Yeah, so I think we're always kind of thinking about how we can learn and grow. And for me, what I think it always should come down to is how do we place the people we work with? How do we place whānau at the center? And how can we best collaborate to meet their needs? I don't think as a system we're perfect at doing that, but I think as long as we keep that in mind and in our hearts, then we can learn and grow.
Nice. Thank you. Hey, Kelsi, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. We've covered a lot of ground, and I really heard some really key things from you around the right to a decent home, housing as a human right, and putting whānau at the centre of the decisions that we're making. So thank you for sharing your insights and your wisdom, and thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
We'd like to thank Kelsi for taking the time to speak with us for this episode. More information on this episode can be found in the episode description. And don't forget to subscribe to the Cha Hub podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.